Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson 145, 146 and 147, the Hilchois Shemita and Yovel from chapter 6 until 13. There are many important events being combined this evening, and each and every one of them is connected to each other. First of all, it is the last Rambam lesson of this Hakhel year. In fact, the topic of Hakhel happens to be mentioned in today's shiur. We also marking the birthday of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe. 34 years ago, in the year of Tovshin Memtes, the Rebbe mentioned at that time, Tovshin Memtes, it was 200 years of the birthday of the Tzemach Tzedek. And while the Rebbe was speaking, it was the same kvius as this year. Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbos. And the question that the Rebbe presented in the Farbrengen, how is it possible Rosh Hashanah, where the entire central theme of Rosh Hashanah is all about the participation, the involvement, the actual functioning as the human being, as the one who crowns God Almighty as the King of the universe. So since it is such central aspect of that particular holiday, how is it possible that Rosh Hashanah, that falls on Shabbos, such an important thing is being ignored? Because we are not blowing on Shabbos. And the answer that was given, that there is two types of the process of annulment, self-nullification. Sometimes a person is an entire structure of a human being and he nullifies himself. The real level of annulment is that a person is not there to annul himself. So each and every year, a person is crowning and nullifying himself and accepting the kingdom of God by the activity of blowing the shofar. The activity is a very valid activity of self-nullification, but yet there is someone out there who nullifies himself. Where on Rosh Hashanah, that falls on Shabbos, silence speaks volumes. Why silence speaks volumes? Because the level of nullification is way more intense, way more powerful than when it's being done in this particular kvius as this year. It is also very important to note that this book of Seder Zoim, the 7th volume of the Rambam, is being concluded the first day of the 7th month of the year. So we are concluding the rules of the sabbatical year, which happens to be at the end of the 7th year, which happens to be written at the end of the 7th volume of the Rambam, which happened to be this year being marked at the entry of the first day of the 7th biblical month of the year, which is the month of Tishrei. What was famous about the birthday of the Tzemach Tzedek, that in his bris, the Alter Rebbe was reciting the summary or the contents of the first 3 chapters of Tanya, which starting with the Shvu'o, oath that a person takes before he comes in to this world, Tehi Tzadik, he should be a righteous man. The word oath in Hebrew is the same roots of Shvu'o, Sheva, and Soiva, a oath. Number 7 and number and satiation, they are both spelled in an identical way. The idea of the 7th month happens to contain all those three elements, because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is an element of an oath and a covenant that we making with God Almighty. This particular holiday happens to be the 7th month when I'm starting the biblical count from Nisan the 1st, so therefore Tishrei is the 7th, and happen to be as well a month that is being satiated both by him being defined as Chag HaOsif, the time of collection, and being satiated where the flow of our material, physical, and spiritual life are being determined in this particular holiday. So it's a very, very important day. We are also concluding, making a siyum, and as well we are marking today a very important yahrzeit of Mrs. Rosa Schneider, a lady who happened to merit in her life to be a living testimony of someone who fulfilled the shvuah of the Hit Tzaddik, be a righteous person, by the fact that we are sitting over here in this particular location. Thanks a lot to her. So obviously there is an element of a koras toiv that I think it's worthwhile to be mentioned. So the summary of the first chapter of the first lesson covers the prohibition to do business with the fruits of Shvis. Obviously a person must make a living. However, to do it in a commercial way, it is forbidden. To do it in a non-commercial way, it will be permitted. What does it mean, not commercial way? As long as he is not measuring the food by a size, by a weight, by a count, that will be fine. However, Shvis is so sanctified that when a person is selling a Shvis, a Shemita fruit, to another person, the money he received must be treated as well with the treatment of Shvis. So both the original fruit was not removed from the sanctity of Shvis and must be treated accordingly, but also the exchange of those fruit is also holy. Now what happened? He trade with him not for a fiat currency, as we called it, for cash, but he exchanged one fruit for another fruit or another product. It's called a barter trade. He was bartering with him an apple for an orange. So the original apple is holy with the holiness of Shvis, but also the orange he received in exchange for the apple is holy as well. He took the orange and he purchased with that coffee. So the orange is not holy anymore, but the coffee will be. He took the coffee and he exchanged it for sugar. The coffee is not holy anymore, but the sugar is. Bottom line, the original product is holy with the sanctity of Shvis, and the final product as well, both of them, the Kedusha, the sanctity of Shvis, remaining on them. The summary of the 7th chapter is about the aspect of bi'ur. The Torah tells you that the year of the sabbatical will be for you to consume food for your animal and for the beast that is in your field. Since the Torah placed the beast in your field last, what it meant to say, as long as the beast in the field have access to a fruit, then you are allowed to benefit from this fruit at your own yard and at your own home. At the moment that a fruit that is growing in the field and is accessible to the beast in the field is no more accessible, at this point you have no access anymore to the fruit that is in your house. For example, a fig tree have a certain season when it's not available any longer in the field. At this moment that it's not available in the field, a person must get rid of this particular fruit in his own home. How he will get rid of it? Ideally, to burn it. Or if he has sometimes before it, instead to burn it, he can go and distribute it to the poor, to friends, to have them eat it, as long that when the times of the bi'u is the destruction, the burning, the getting rid of it, is there. Further than this, sometimes a person may have in a jar or container different pickled vegetables of different types. Let's say he has a cucumber, he has a pepper, and he has an olive. So 3 types of vegetables. Some of the vegetables, they are not available anymore in the field. Some are. So he will have to take out from the jar that particular vegetable that is not available any longer in the field and get rid of it. Some of the items that are growing, they are not subject to bi'u. Some types of fruits or vegetations, they kept always to replace themselves. So obviously the fact that they keep replacing themselves is automatically putting a exemption upon them from bi'u. The reason? Because there is no really expiry date from them being in the field. Some items, they will be exempt altogether from the restriction of Shemita if they cannot really be defined as edible items or items that you can use them for painting. So those type, which yesterday we have mentioned, typically those type of grass that primarily they are there for healing purposes. In the 8th chapter, the Rambam deals about a very interesting concept that a person should never give support or provide any promotion, as we say, put a stumbling block in front of the blind. In other words, if a person, he is suspected that he may be violating the rules of Shvis, not necessarily it is certain, but he is suspected, it is forbidden to sell him such equipment or devices that they'll primarily and only use is for such activities that are forbidden. For example, a person is forbidden to sell a axe that is primarily to plow the field to somebody who is suspected to ignore Shvis, because most likely he will use it in a prohibited way on Shvis. If a person is not certain whether the other person is suspected or not, it's okay for him to sell it. A person can also sell him those type of equipment that can be used for a prohibited activity and can be used for a permitted activity. For example, a magal is a certain item that is being used to chop grains. So such an item can be used for a activity that is permitted, as we have learned before, that a person is permitted to go and collect under certain condition sfichim, if it grew in a sdeibu, in a unresidential areas. So again, a person will allow to sell to a choshu, to somebody who is suspected to violate shvis, such a equipment that can be used also for permissible purposes. A similar issue will be when a person is about to purchase any product from an individual who may not be aware of the sanctity of Shvis. So when he is purchasing by him a fruit, he is exchanging it or with a currency of cash or with a barter. So when he is giving him the exchange of the product that he is selling, and the seller is not aware that the exchange I gave him for this product contains a intense sanctity that must be treated properly, I am putting a stumbling block in front of him. For that reason, it is recommended not to buy from such a person. Further than this, there is a problem, especially when comes Sukkot, and this is the year post Shemita, and he is about to purchase an esrog. If he will give him in exchange of the esrog currency, and the person is not aware that the currency have right now being converted into the holiness of Shvis, it is a stumbling block. So what should I do? But I gotta have a esrog in order to shake the lulav. And the answer is, I should just pay him for the lulav inflated price and have him give me the esrog as a gift. So when I am persuading him to give me the lulav as a sale, because the lulav is not an edible item, and the esrog is a gift, that's perfect, that's fine. It is also important to note that in Judaism, if someone is suspected to violate one type of avero, not necessarily that he will be suspected to violate another type of avero. For example, we have learned before about the importance of maisois, maiser sheni, for example. If someone who is a suspect to take maiser sheni lightly, not necessarily he will be a suspect as someone who violates the issue of shvis, and vice versa. A person who is suspect to violate shvis, not necessarily he is a suspect to violate maiser sheni. The reason? Because each and every one of those two have very unique severities. The severity of maiser sheni is the prohibition to consume it outside Yerushalayim, outside Jerusalem. On the other hand, the prohibition, the severity in Shvis, that there is no real redemption, as we have learned before, that the Kedusha, the holiness of Shvis, though it is moving to the other item, it still remains in the original item. So you have both sore ends of the sticks simultaneously. In the talking about priests, there is one type of things that the Kohanim are suspected. Kohanim, they are primary suspects to take lightly the idea of Shvis. The reason? Because they are assuming if tumo, which is a very severe product that anyone foreign who consumes tumo is subject to misobidei shomayim, so they may say, well, shvis, that the punishment is not as severe as tumo, obviously it is okay for them to eat it without the proper restrictions. For that reason, there is a very interesting rule that if a product of tumo has been mixed with products of shvis, though generally in such a case it can be sold the kohanim, but in case of a shvis, it should not be sold the kohanim, and it will be treated as medumo, and will have to get rid of it without selling it to the kohanim. In the 9th chapter, the Rambam deals with the concept of Shmitas Ksofim. The idea of Shmitas Ksofim, loosely translated, is forgiving of the debt. If a person owes another person a X amount of dollars, and the year of Shmita passed, the person has no right to claim back his debt. It says in the Torah. How do I know? And this is something talking about Hakhel. This is where Hakhel was mentioned. It says in the Torah, at the end of 7 years, you will do a Shemita, and this is what Shemita is all about, forgiving of the debt. And the same word as at the end appears in the context of Hakhel. How do I know that I have to gather the Jewish people at the temple for the reading of the Torah by the king? It says also at the end of the Shnas HaShmita. So since at both of them the word Miketz at the end is mentioned, so one of them teaching towards the other. So at the end of the Shemitah, if a person owes somebody, the debt is forgiven. However, biblically, in order for the debt to be forgiven, you got to practice the Yovel, which means the entire Jewish people must reside in the land of Israel. If this condition is not met, so biblically there is no concept of Shmitas Ksofim, there is no forgiving of the debt biblically. However, rabbinically, in order Sheloi Tishokach Torah Shmito Mi-Yisrael, in order people should not forget the concept of Shmitas Ksofim altogether, so rabbinically there is a concept of the Shmitas Ksofim. There is a few exceptions where the forgiving of the debt is not going to be relevant. For example, if it is not really a debt, but it's an obligation. If I have purchased, if I have worked for you and you owe me a salary, this is not a debt. This is a product, a service that you got to pay for it. A woman who divorced her husband, he got to pay the ksuva. This is not a debt. This is an obligation, and so on. However, all of those cases, if the beneficiary converted the obligation, the monetary obligation, into a debt, so the subjugation of Shmitas Ksofim is applicable. But there is a few exceptions where a person is going to be exempt from the forgiving of the debt. In other words, the debt is not going to be forgiven. For example, if he hypothecated the debt and he linked it to a collateral of a real estate, specified a certain area, then the debt is not forgiven. Another way, if he is giving away based in on his behalf, he's giving them his debt to collect. It's also a way to escape from this exemption. And that's how Prusbul came all about. Hillel Hazoken, he have seen that people are avoiding to extend loans to their friends because they were afraid that they will have to forgive the debt. So therefore, he instituted the institution of Prusbul. Prusbul is basically a signed contract where a person assigns his debt to Beit Din to collect on his behalf. By doing so, they are not collecting, he is not collecting, Beit Din collects it. So when Beit Din is the one who is collecting, it avoids the actual text in the Torah. It says, Shomoit kol ma sheyodo asher yashe bere'ehu. If you are not allowed to go and ask back the debt from your friends, but in case Beit Din, they are not the friends, they are an authority. The 10th chapter, the Rambam gives a very short history about what we call the Jubilee. Jubilee is every 50 years, same way as there is a sabbatical in days, there is a sabbatical years, and there is a sabbatical goes after 7 sabbaticals. After 7 cycles of Shemitah, there is the years of Yovel. Why is it so important? There is about 6 different implications that are deriving from the phenomena of Yovel. First of all, if a person has a slave, Jewish slave, he must be freed in the year of Yovel. If a person sells a house, it comes back to him in the year of Yovel. If a person sells a field, comes back to him in Yovel. If a person donates a certain donation which has to do with property, is Yovel. The concept of Shmita biblically is, according to the Rambam, is attached to Yovel, and biblical Hashmotas Ksofim is attached to Yovel. So there is 7 different derivatives that they are attached to the concept of Yovel.
The house on the field all in Eretz Yisrael, yeah?
Correct. Soon we're going to get to it. And that's exactly in the 11th chapter. He deals in the actual details. It is important that the tkiyos, the blowing of the shofar that we will do on Rosh Hashanah, the rules, the sounds, the order are being derived from Yovel. The structure of the sounds of Tuot, Tkiyo, and so on, they are being learned from Yovel. In fact, Rosh Hashanah, we blowing on, if Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, only we're not blowing, but in Israel, in front of Beit Din, and Beit Din is there, they are allowed to blow. When it comes to the blowing on Yovel, on Yom Kippur, not on Rosh Hashanah, you blowing the same amount of tkiyos that we do on Rosh Hashanah, but you can do it even in Shabbos, even not in front of Beit Din. There was a standby period in Jubilee between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, though officially the Avodim were not released, but they were not doing any activities yet. They were just partying and having fun, but yet they were still under the possession of their master, but their final release and exit from their slavery took place after Yom Kippur. At the 11th chapter, the Rambam goes into the details of a person who is disposing, whether from his Sedei Achuzo, a field that he owns, though ideally he should not dispose of it unless he is poor and he has nothing to eat. However, if he went ahead and sold, the sale is a sale, but he must have the field by the buyer for at least 2 years, and then after 2 years he has the right to repurchase back the field from the buyer. The amount that he will be paying him back will be calculated based on the amount of years left till the Yovel. Example, there is 10 years till the Yovel, he sold him the field for $100. So after 3 years of the sale, which 7 years remain, so since he sold it for $100, each and every $10 represents a year. 3 years pass, so the remaining balance is $70. He gives him $70 and he gets back the field. That's how it works. If for one reason or another he has not repurchased back the field that he sold, so he'll wait until the Yovel, and then the field gets back to him. So this is the rule of Sedei Achuzo, a field. A similar, slightly different, will be in Botei Orichoimo. Botei Orichoimo, a house that is in a city that was surrounded with a wall from the ancient time of Yeshua bin Nun. If a person possesses a house in such an area, he is allowed to, and he sells it, so he has time to redeem it for 1 year. If after a year he did not redeem it, then he lost the field and the buyer owns it. Then there is a third category, which is called Botei Achatzeirim. Botei Achatzeirim, it is a house, but not in a city that's surrounded with a wall. Such a house, the seller will get double advantage. A, he will be able to release it after a year, and in any case, the house will get back to him, even if nobody purchased or redeemed it at the Yovel. At the 13th chapter, the Rambam deals about the status of these particular properties that were given to the Kohanim and Levim, though that they are not allowed to have their own land in Israel. They're not allowed to take part of the spoil where people getting while they waging war against their enemies, so they are forbidden to take any part of the spoils. The Rambam makes a very interesting distinction that the prohibition for them to own land is only applicable to this territory that was originally given to them by the boundaries, the biblical boundaries. If a Jewish king, for one reason or another, decided to occupy additional land outside Israel, outside that territory, so they have a full right to obtain as much land as possible, and they're not under this restriction. Towards the end, and this is a famous one that the Rebbe quoted many times, and this is very important to note, especially right now, that many people have different form of criticizing the in Israel, for example, the arrangement where yeshiva scholars were exempt from participation in the army. So here the Rambam writes like this: why was the tribe of Levi was designated and separated in the inheriting the land like his brother? Because he was designated to serve God and to teach his righteous path to the public. And for that reason, in order for them to have the full focus and concentration towards their primary important function, they not waging war like the rest of Israel, they not getting their own land, and they not occupying with their physical body, but they are the elite units of God. As it says, bless God, his unit, and he, Almighty, gave them in exchange those gifts and special rights and privileges that we have covered in this book. And then in the 13th and final words of the Rambam of today's, well, it's Rosh Hashanah's shiur, he says the following words: not only the tribe of Levi, but each and every member of mankind, including non-Jews as well, that his spirit have inspired him, and he understood upon his own knowledge to separate, to stand in front of God, to serve him, to know God. And he went straight according to the path that God Almighty created, and he removed from his neck the yoke of the many calculation, the confusions that human men's and mankind. He was sanctified to the level of Kodesh Kodoshim, and God will be his share forever, and he will give him in this world whatever is necessary for him, exactly as he gave to the Kohanim and Levim. And as David Melech says, Hashem menos chelki bekoisi atotoim echgeoli. This is the end of the Rambam, and today is a big Yom Tev, and should be aksivo v'chasim etoivo, leshono toivo misuko. Thank you.